The door slammed shut behind me with a cold finality, the echo ricocheting off the barren walls of the room. I spun around, disbelief and fury surging through me as the metallic click of the lock sealed my fate. My father stood on the other side, his face pale but resolute. "This is for your own good, Claire," he said. "For my own good?" I shouted, slamming my fists against the door. "You locked me in here. What's wrong with you?" Behind him, my mother averted her eyes, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something but didn't dare. My younger sister, Lily, peeked out from behind her, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. They left without another word, their footsteps fading down the corridor. I was 24 years old, a successful woman with a career, friends, and a life I'd built on my own terms. But none of that mattered to my family anymore, not after the accusations. I sank to the floor, my mind racing through the events of the past week. My father's company, a tech empire he had built from nothing, had been hit by a devastating data breach. Trade secrets worth millions were leaked to competitors, and the fallout had been swift and brutal. It wasn't long before Aaron, my cousin and my father's right-hand man, discovered an email trail pointing to me as the culprit. The evidence was fake. I knew it, and deep down I suspected Aaron knew it too. But he had always resented my position in the family, envying the trust my father had placed in me. "Claire," my father had said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "How could you? After everything I've done for you?" I had pleaded, begged them to believe me. But Aaron's evidence was damning, and my family was too shaken to see the truth. The room they locked me in was cold and unwelcoming, its bare walls a stark contrast to the warmth of the home I had grown up in. A narrow cot was pushed into one corner, a small window with iron bars too high to reach offered a sliver of light, and a bucket in the corner served as a cruel reminder of my captivity. I paced the room, my anger growing with every step. How could they do this to me? I wasn't a child, and I wasn't a criminal. But no matter how many times I replayed the argument in my head, the outcome was always the same. My family had chosen to believe Aaron over me. By the second day, desperation set in. Food was slid through a slot in the door twice a day, and no one spoke to me. My voice was raw from shouting, my fists bruised from pounding on the unyielding steel. I realized then that no one was coming to save me. If I wanted to clear my name, I'd have to do it myself. I began searching the room, inspecting every crack and crevice for something, anything, that could help me escape. It was beneath the cot that I found it, a loose floorboard. Underneath the floorboard was a notebook, its cover worn and the pages filled with hurried, messy handwriting. As I flipped through it, my blood ran cold. The notebook wasn't mine, but the contents were damning. Plans for the data breach, detailed accounts of bribes and blackmail, it was all here, and Aaron's name was scrawled across multiple pages. My hands trembled as I realized what this meant. Aaron hadn't just framed me. He had been plotting against my father's company for years. The notebook was my lifeline. If I could get it to my father, he'd have to believe me. But first, I needed to get out of this room. I returned to the loose floorboard, prying it up further in hopes of finding more. Instead, I uncovered a narrow, dark tunnel leading down into the unknown. It wasn't exactly inviting, but it was my only option. Grabbing the notebook, I slipped into the tunnel, my heart pounding as I crawled forward into the darkness. The air in the tunnel was thick and damp, the walls close enough to scrape my shoulders as I moved. I had no idea where it led, but staying in that room wasn't an option. The further I crawled, the more I noticed strange markings carved into the walls, symbols and diagrams that looked ancient and cryptic. My unease grew, but I pressed on. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a small wooden door. I pushed it open cautiously, stepping into what appeared to be an old storage room. The room was filled with dusty boxes and cobweb-covered shelves, but it was what sat on the central table that caught my attention. A stack of old letters bearing my family's crest. I opened the top letter, and as I read, my heart sank. It detailed a secret my family had kept for generations. A deal made with a powerful, shadowy organization to secure their wealth and influence. The price? One family member sacrificed every few generations. And now it was my turn. The letters were brittle with age, their ink faded but still legible. Each word seemed to press heavier on my chest, confirming a truth I had never imagined. My family's success wasn't built solely on hard work and ingenuity. It was built on a pact, a cursed legacy that demanded blood. The most recent letter, dated just 2 months ago, outlined the situation in detail. It mentioned the upcoming sacrifice, the name conspicuously absent but unmistakably referring to me. My father's note at the bottom sealed my fate. We have no choice but to protect the family. Anger boiled inside me, threatening to consume every rational thought. This wasn't about Aaron's schemes or a breach of trust. My family had condemned me to this fate long before the data leak. I folded the letters and shoved them into my jacket alongside the notebook. Every instinct told me to run, but the storage room wasn't connected to the outside world. It was another layer of isolation. I began exploring the space, searching for an exit. A rusted ladder in the corner led to a trapdoor in the ceiling, faint light seeping through the cracks. My breath quickened as I climbed, hope surging with every step. The trapdoor groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a small hatch in the middle of a grassy field. I emerged into the cool night air, the vastness of the forest stretching before me. Freedom was close, but so was danger. The stillness of the forest was unnerving. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I didn't know where I was, but I couldn't afford to stay put. As I moved through the dense woods, a chilling sound reached my ears. Distant voices. They were calling my name. Aaron's men. Panic gripped me, but I forced myself to keep moving, my footsteps as quiet as possible. The forest became a maze, the shadows stretching and twisting as moonlight filtered through the trees. I heard the crack of a branch too close behind me. They were gaining on me. Just as my lungs began to burn and my legs threatened to give out, I spotted it. A cabin, half hidden by the undergrowth. Its roof sagged, and the windows were boarded up, but it was shelter. I darted inside, closing the door softly behind me. The interior was just as abandoned as it looked. Dusty furniture, peeling wallpaper, and an air of desolation. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the notebook and letters tightly as I listened. The voices outside grew louder, closer. Spread out, one of them barked. She has to be here somewhere. I searched the cabin for anything that could help me defend myself. A rusted poker by the fireplace was the best I could find. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Footsteps creaked on the porch. My breath caught as the door handle jiggled. "She's not in there," one voice said. "Check anyway," another replied. The door swung open, and a flashlight beam swept through the room. I crouched behind a broken sofa, every muscle in my body taut. The man took a step inside, his heavy boots echoing against the wooden floor. Just as the flashlight's beam passed over me, a shout from outside drew his attention. "Hey, over here!" He turned and ran out, slamming the door behind him. My heart thundered in my chest as I waited, afraid to move. After what felt like an eternity, the voices faded into the distance. I knew they'd be back. This wasn't over. As I prepared to leave the cabin, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around, poker raised, and came face to face with a man. He was older, his face weathered and lined, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. "Easy there," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm not one of them. Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Name's Jack," he said, "and I think we might have a common enemy." Jack explained that he had been watching Aaron's men for weeks, tracking their movements and piecing together their plans. "I don't know the whole story," he said, "but I know enough to recognize you're in trouble." I hesitated. Trusting anyone felt dangerous, but I didn't have many options. "If you know about them, then you know I can't stay here," I said. Jack nodded. "You're right, but if you want to stop them, you'll need help. And lucky for you, I'm pretty good at dealing with guys like them." We spent the next few hours coming up with a plan. Jack's knowledge of the forest and Aaron's operations was invaluable. He showed me maps, marked with routes and hiding spots, and explained how we could evade capture. "We'll need to get this evidence to someone who can use it," Jack said, tapping the notebook. "You've got enough here to take Aaron down, but only if it gets into the right hands." I nodded, determination replacing fear. "Let's do it." Jack and I set out at dawn, moving through the forest with caution. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig set my nerves on edge, but Jack's calm presence kept me focused. We were heading toward the nearest town, where Jack claimed to have a contact who could help. But as we neared the edge of the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Before we reached the town, Aaron's men found us. It happened fast: shouts, gunfire, and a mad dash through the trees. Jack pulled me behind a boulder, his rifle steady as he returned fire. "Stay low," he barked. I clutched the notebook tightly, my heart pounding as bullets whizzed past. This was a fight we couldn't afford to lose. The forest echoed with chaos, shouts, gunfire, and the crunch of leaves under hurried steps. I crouched behind the boulder, every breath sharp and shallow, gripping the notebook like it was my lifeline. Jack fired back with precision, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the mayhem around us. "Claire," he yelled over his shoulder. "We can't hold here for long. You need to run." "I'm not leaving you," I shot back, my voice shaking. "You have to," he insisted. "They're not after me. They want you and that notebook. If they get it, everything's lost." I hesitated, torn between my survival instincts and the loyalty I felt toward the man who had risked so much to help me. Jack didn't wait for my response. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a flare, and launched it high into the sky. The bright light exploded above the treetops, momentarily disorienting our pursuers. "Go now," he barked. I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at my face and arms as I pushed through the undergrowth. The sound of gunfire faded behind me, but I knew it wouldn't take long for them to follow. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing in on all sides. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to exposing the truth. Up ahead, I spotted a river cutting through the woods. Without hesitation, I plunged into the icy water, letting the current carry me downstream. The cold was a shock to my system, but it masked my trail and gave me a fleeting sense of safety. When I finally dragged myself onto the riverbank, shivering and exhausted, I found myself at the edge of a small farm. A weathered barn loomed in the distance, its doors slightly ajar. I stumbled toward it, desperate for shelter. Inside, I found a woman stacking hay bales. She looked up, startled as I entered. "Who are you?" she demanded, eyeing me warily. "My name's Claire," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need help. Please." She studied me for a moment before nodding. "Come inside. But if you're bringing trouble, you'd better warn me now." The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, didn't ask many questions. She handed me a dry blanket and a cup of tea, her sharp eyes assessing me as I warmed myself by the fire. "I saw that flare earlier," she said. "Trouble in the woods?" I nodded. "They're after me. My cousin. He's trying to cover up crimes that could destroy my family and ruin lives. I have evidence, but I need to get it to someone who can help." Martha frowned. "Sounds like you've stepped into a hornet's nest." "Lucky for you, I know someone who might be able to help." Martha called an old friend, a man named Victor, who lived in the nearby town. He was a journalist, known for uncovering corruption and exposing those who thought they were untouchable. "We'll take my truck," Martha said. "Victor's place isn't far, but we'll need to keep a low profile." The drive to town was tense. Every passing car felt like a threat, every shadow a potential ambush. Martha's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her eyes scanning the road for signs of trouble. When we arrived at Victor's modest home, he opened the door cautiously, his face lighting up with recognition when he saw Martha. Victor listened intently as I explained everything, the accusations, the betrayal, and the contents of the notebook. When I handed it to him, his eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. This is incredible," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "If this is all true, Your cousin is looking at a prison sentence that will outlast his career. It is true, I said firmly, but we have to move fast. He has people everywhere. If he finds out we're here, Victor nodded. I'll start drafting the story tonight. This will hit every major outlet by morning. Just as Victor began his work, Martha's phone buzzed. She frowned as she read the message. They know you're here, she said grimly. Aaron's men are in town, asking questions. Panic surged through me, but Victor remained calm. We'll handle it. I've got a safe room in the basement. Stay there while I finish this. Martha and I descended into the dimly lit basement, the air thick with tension. The sound of tires screeching outside shattered the quiet. We heard heavy footsteps above us, voices barking orders. They're inside, Martha whispered. I clutched the notebook tightly, my mind racing for a way out. Suddenly, there was a loud bang as the door to the basement was kicked open. Run! Martha shouted, shoving me toward a hidden passage at the back of the room. The passage was narrow and dark, leading to an alley behind the house. I emerged into the night, my heart pounding as I sprinted down the street. Behind me, I could hear the chaos unfolding inside Victor's house. I didn't stop running until I reached the bus station. The next morning, Victor's story was everywhere. Headlines screamed Aaron's name, detailing the corruption and betrayal that had almost gone unnoticed. The notebook's evidence was undeniable, and within hours, authorities were raiding his offices. Aaron was arrested, his smug confidence replaced by fury as cameras captured his downfall. With Aaron behind bars, my name was finally cleared. My family, overwhelmed by guilt, tried to apologize, but the damage was done. I moved to a new city, determined to rebuild my life. The scars of betrayal remained, but they were a reminder of my strength. A strength no one could take from me. And for the first time in years, I felt free. It all started with a gust of wind that blew open the door of the tiny cafe, causing heads to turn. Amelia stepped inside, clutching her coat tightly against the cold. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room, her nerves threatening to get the better of her. She wasn't sure what to expect from this blind date. Her best friend Leah had set it up, insisting it would be fun, a change of pace for her. Amelia spotted a table near the center of the cafe with a lone man sitting at it, engrossed in his phone. Assuming it was him, she squared her shoulders and approached. She wasn't going to let her nervousness get the better of her. "Hi," she said, her voice slightly breathless as she pulled out the chair. "Sorry if I'm a little late. Traffic was insane." The man looked up, startled. He had piercing green eyes, and his expression shifted from confusion to surprise. "Oh," he said, setting his phone down. "You must be Amelia," she offered quickly, smiling nervously. "Leah probably told you about me." He hesitated for a moment, his gaze studying her carefully. "Right, Amelia? Of course." He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her cheeks warming under his intense stare. They began talking, and Amelia couldn't help but notice that he seemed different from what she had imagined. He wasn't overly friendly, but his voice carried an air of authority and charm. As the conversation continued, she found herself oddly drawn to him, even though something about the situation felt slightly off. When the waiter came to take their orders, the man looked up with a smirk. "Order whatever you like," he said, his tone casual yet commanding. Amelia glanced at the menu, flustered. "Oh, I don't need anything too fancy," she said, trying to keep her nerves in check. "Trust me," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You deserve to enjoy yourself." She felt her cheeks flush again, her embarrassment mingling with intrigue. Something about him felt out of place, a strange magnetism that she couldn't ignore. Still, she brushed it off. Leah had said this blind date would be memorable, and maybe this was just what she needed. The conversation became surprisingly easy as they talked about hobbies, work, and little things that made them laugh. Despite his initial aloofness, he started opening up, sharing witty anecdotes and teasing her about her quirky habits. Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, her initial nervousness melting away. But as the date progressed, there were moments when she caught him staring at her, his expression unreadable. It sent a shiver down her spine, though she couldn't tell if it was from unease or attraction. Finally, after nearly an hour, he leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. "So, Amelia," he began, his voice soft but steady, "what brings you to something like this? A blind date, I mean." She hesitated, fiddling with her napkin. "I guess I just wanted to try something new," she admitted. "Life's been a little complicated lately." "Complicated how?" he asked, his green eyes locking onto hers. Her chest tightened under his gaze. "Just, money struggles, job hunting, normal stuff." She forced a small laugh, hoping to lighten the mood. He didn't laugh. Instead, his expression grew darker, more contemplative. "And you're here, sitting across from me, trying to find a moment of escape?" His words hit a little too close to home, but she nodded. "I guess so." He leaned back, his demeanor shifting again. "Interesting." Before she could ask what he meant, another man approached the table. He was tall, sharply dressed, and had a commanding presence. Amelia looked up, confused, as the stranger leaned down to whisper something in her date's ear. The green-eyed man's expression tightened, and he gave a small nod. "I'll be right back," he said, standing abruptly. "Stay here." Amelia blinked, startled by the sudden change in his tone. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "It's fine," he said, but his curt reply didn't ease her concern. He walked off with the sharply dressed man, leaving her alone at the table. As she waited, Amelia's thoughts raced. Who was this guy, really? He had a mysterious air about him, and now this strange interruption was adding to the puzzle. She glanced around the cafe, feeling increasingly out of place. Her stomach churned with unease. Minutes later, he returned, his expression unreadable. He sat down without a word, and Amelia couldn't help but blurt out, "Is everything all right? You seem different." He hesitated, then let out a long breath. "I wasn't expecting this," he said cryptically. "Expecting what?" she pressed, her anxiety mounting. "You," he said, his eyes locking onto hers again. "I wasn't expecting someone like you." Her heart skipped a beat at the intensity in his voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He leaned forward again, his expression softer this time. "Amelia, I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how you're going to react." She swallowed hard, her pulse racing. "What is it?" Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the cafe's entrance. Amelia turned to see a group of men in suits entering, their eyes scanning the room. Her date's expression darkened instantly, and he stood up abruptly. "Come with me," he said, grabbing her hand. "What's going on?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. "No time to explain," he said, pulling her towards the back exit. "Trust me." Despite her fear, she followed him, her heart pounding as they slipped out of the cafe and into the alleyway behind it. The cold air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed as she tried to process what was happening. "Who are those men? What's going on?" she demanded. He stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Amelia, there's something you need to know. My name isn't Eric, and I'm not just some guy on a blind date. My real name is Lucas, and let's just say my life is a little more complicated than yours." Her mind spun as she tried to make sense of his words. "What are you talking about? Who are you, really?" Let's just say I come from a world where people don't play fair," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. "Those men back there? They're part of that world, and they're not exactly friendly." Amelia's stomach churned as the pieces started to fall into place. "Are you in danger?" "Am I in danger?" Lucas hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I promise. I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." She stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Despite the chaos, she felt an inexplicable pull towards him, a sense that he was someone she could trust, even if she didn't understand why. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's jaw tightened. "We run." And with that, he took her hand again, leading her into the dark, twisting alleyways as the sound of footsteps and shouts echoed behind them. Amelia's breath came in sharp gasps as they darted through the labyrinth of narrow alleyways. The cold air bit at her lungs, and the pounding of her heart echoed in her ears. Lucas's grip on her hand was firm, guiding her with precision as though he knew the city's hidden pathways by heart. "Where are we going?" she managed to gasp between breaths. "Somewhere safe," Lucas said, glancing back over his shoulder. His green eyes burned with intensity, a stark contrast to the fear coursing through her veins. "We just need to keep moving." The shouts behind them grew louder, closer. Amelia's legs burned, but she didn't dare slow down. Lucas led her around another corner, through a cluttered courtyard, and into what appeared to be an abandoned building. He pushed the door open and quickly pulled her inside, shutting it behind them with a quiet but decisive click. "Stay quiet," he whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. His chest heaved with exertion, but his expression remained calm and calculated. Amelia nodded, her back pressed against the cold, damp wall as she tried to steady her breathing. The building smelled of mildew and decay, and the dim light barely illuminated their surroundings. Lucas peeked through a crack in the boarded-up window, his jaw tight. "What's happening?" Amelia finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are those men, and why are they after you?" Lucas turned to her, his expression softening ever so slightly. "They're after me because of who I am, or rather what I represent." "That's not an answer," she said, her frustration momentarily outweighing her fear. "You owe me an explanation. You dragged me into this." He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his dark hair. "All right, but you're not going to like it. Try me," she said, crossing her arms even though her legs were still shaking. Lucas leaned against the wall, his gaze distant. "I'm not just some guy. My family is, well, let's just say they're powerful. They control a lot of things, businesses, politics, underground networks. And because of that, there are people who want to see us destroyed." Amelia stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're part of a crime family?" His lips twitched into a humorless smile. "That's one way to put it. But I'm not like them. I left that world behind years ago. I wanted a normal life, away from all the power struggles and violence." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Then why are those men after you?" "Because leaving isn't as simple as saying goodbye," Lucas said bitterly. "There are people who think I know too much, people who see me as a threat even though I've done everything to stay out of their way. Tonight was supposed to be a normal evening, a chance to forget about all of it, just for a little while." Amelia's stomach churned. "And you picked a blind date for that?" "I didn't pick it," he said with a shrug. "My friend thought it'd be good for me. I didn't expect. Well, you." Her heart fluttered despite the chaos surrounding them. "What about me? I didn't expect someone like you to make me feel." He hesitated, his eyes locking onto hers. "Like maybe there's still something worth fighting for." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Despite everything, his dangerous world, the fear pounding in her chest, there was something undeniable between them. But before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside, and her fear came rushing back. "They found us," Lucas said, his voice low and tense. "We need to move." He grabbed her hand again, and they slipped out through a side door just as the sound of heavy footsteps reached the front of the building. They ran through the dark streets, the tension between them thick as they tried to stay ahead of their pursuers. Finally, they reached an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. Lucas guided her inside, locking the door behind them. The space was vast and empty, the air thick with dust. Amelia leaned against a metal beam, her body trembling with exhaustion. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Lucas said, his eyes scanning the room. "They won't think to look here right away. This place was important to me once." Amelia frowned. "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "It belonged to my mother. Before everything went wrong." The raw emotion in his voice took her by surprise. For the first time, she saw a vulnerability in Lucas that made him seem more human, more real. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. "She died," he said simply, his gaze distant. caught in the crossfire of a world she didn't belong to. Just like you. The weight of his words hit her hard. I'm sorry, she said, her voice soft. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. That's why I left. I didn't want anyone else to get hurt because of me. But now, he paused, his green eyes searching hers. Now I don't know if I can keep you safe. Amelia stepped closer, her fear mingling with a newfound determination. I don't need you to protect me, Lucas. I just need you to be honest with me. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, here's the truth. I don't want you to leave. Even though it's dangerous, even though it's wrong, I can't let you go. Her heart pounded as she met his gaze. Then don't, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, Lucas closed the distance between them, his hand gently cupping her face as he pressed his forehead to hers. You don't know what you're getting into, he murmured. Maybe not, she whispered back. But I'm willing to find out. Before either of them could say more, the sound of distant sirens shattered the moment. Lucas's expression hardened. They're getting closer. We need to figure out our next move. Amelia nodded, her resolve strengthening. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to run anymore. Together, they would face whatever danger lay ahead, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to survive. Lucas quickly began pacing the warehouse, his sharp eyes scanning for anything they could use. Amelia watched him, her nerves jangling with tension, but she refused to let fear overwhelm her. She had come too far to back down now. What's the plan? She asked, trying to sound steady. Lucas paused, his hands on his hips as he exhaled deeply. We need to get out of the city. They've got resources, contacts, and eyes everywhere. Staying here is suicide. Her stomach sank. Out of the city? But where would we even go? He gave her a small, wry smile. I've got places. Safe houses. Connections I can still trust. I think. But it won't be easy. Amelia folded her arms tightly across her chest, trying to ignore the fear bubbling under the surface. Then let's go. The sooner, the better. He frowned, stepping closer. Amelia, this isn't just running from the law or avoiding a bad date gone wrong. These people will stop at nothing to take me down. And now that you're with me, they'll see you as leverage. I need you to be sure, absolutely sure, that you want to come with me. She met his intense gaze, her own resolve hardening. I've never been more sure of anything. I'm not leaving you, Lucas. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, his mask of control slipped, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. All right, he said finally. Then we move now. The night swallowed them as they slipped out of the warehouse, sticking to the shadows. Lucas led the way, his movements precise and silent. Amelia followed closely, her heart pounding with every step. They avoided main streets, cutting through back alleys and quiet neighborhoods, until they reached a nondescript black SUV parked under the cover of a large tree. Lucas opened the passenger door for her, his expression unreadable. Get in. She climbed inside, her nerves spiking as he slid into the driver's seat. He started the engine, the low rumble almost deafening in the tense silence. This car's clean, he said, as if reading her thoughts. No trackers. We should have a head start. As they pulled onto the dark road, Amelia couldn't help but glance over at him. Where are we going? There's a cabin about 3 hours north, Lucas replied, his voice low and steady. It's isolated, off the grid. We can regroup there, figure out our next steps. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. Lucas, do you think we'll ever be safe? He glanced at her, his expression softening. I don't know, but I'll do everything in my power to make sure you are. The sincerity in his voice sent a shiver through her. Despite the danger, despite everything she didn't know about him, she believed him. The drive was quiet, tense, and surreal. The city lights faded into darkness as they headed deeper into the countryside. Amelia found herself staring out the window, her mind racing with questions. Who exactly was Lucas? What had she gotten herself into? And why, despite the chaos, did she feel so drawn to him? Her thoughts were interrupted when Lucas suddenly slowed the car, pulling onto the shoulder of the deserted road. He killed the engine and turned to her, his expression serious. "What's wrong?" she asked, her pulse spiking. "I think we're being followed," he said grimly. Amelia's blood ran cold. "What do we do?" Lucas reached under his seat and pulled out a sleek black pistol, checking the chamber with practiced ease. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors. If anything happens, you drive. Don't stop, don't look back. Do you understand?" Her heart hammered in her chest. "Lucas, no, you can't." "Amelia," he said firmly, his green eyes blazing. "This isn't up for debate. Stay here." Before she could argue further, he slipped out of the car, closing the door quietly behind him. She watched as he moved like a shadow, disappearing into the darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the faint hum of a car engine approaching. Amelia's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She strained her ears, desperate to hear any sign of what was happening. Seconds felt like hours as the tension mounted. Then, suddenly, she heard it. A sharp crack, like the sound of a gunshot. Her heart leaped into her throat. Panic surged through her, but before she could act, the driver's side door flew open, and Lucas climbed back in, his face tense but unharmed. "Drive," he ordered. Without hesitation, she started the car, her hands trembling as she pulled back onto the road. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I took care of it," he said shortly, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. "We're clear. For now." She didn't press further, but the weight of his words hung heavy between them. Whatever taking care of it meant, she knew it wasn't good. Still, she couldn't deny the relief flooding through her at the sight of him unharmed. They drove in silence for another hour, the tension slowly giving way to exhaustion. By the time they reached the cabin, Amelia felt like she could collapse. The small, rustic structure was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and complete silence. Lucas parked the car and led her inside, locking the door behind them. The interior was simple but cozy, with a fireplace, a worn sofa, and a small kitchen. He handed her a blanket and gestured toward the couch. "Get some rest," he said, his voice softer now. "You've been through enough for one night." "What about you?" she asked, concern flickering in her eyes. "I'll keep watch," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. As she curled up on the couch, exhaustion finally overtaking her, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Lucas's world was dangerous, unpredictable, and nothing like the life she'd known. But as she drifted off to sleep, one thought remained clear. She wasn't going to abandon him. Not now. Not ever. The fire crackled softly in the cabin, its warmth pushing back the chill of the night. Amelia woke to find Lucas sitting in a chair by the window, the gun resting in his lap. His eyes were distant, scanning the dark woods outside. For a moment, she just watched him, the weight of the night settling heavily on her. "You didn't sleep," she said, her voice hoarse. He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Didn't have the luxury." She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "You can't keep doing this. You can't shoulder all of this on your own." Lucas looked at her, his green eyes weary but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "I've been doing this my whole life, Amelia. Protecting the people I care about. It's just what I know." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. For all his strength and confidence, Lucas was just a man, flawed, burdened, and trying to do the right thing in a world that seemed determined to pull him under. She stood and crossed the room, sitting on the arm of his chair. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said softly. "I'm here. We'll figure it out together." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You say that now. But if you really knew me, if you knew everything I've done—" "I don't care," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Whatever you've done, whoever you were, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is who you are now. And the man sitting in front of me is someone worth fighting for." His breath hitched, and for a moment, she thought he might argue. But then he reached up, his hand cupping her cheek. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, he said, his voice low. Maybe not, she admitted. But I don't care. The next morning, Lucas had a plan. He explained it to Amelia over a quick breakfast of canned food and coffee. They would leave the cabin before sunrise and head to a remote airfield where a trusted contact could get them out of the country. It was risky, but it was their best shot at disappearing completely. As they packed the car, Amelia noticed how calm Lucas seemed, even as danger loomed over them. She admired his resilience, though it worried her how much weight he carried. The drive to the airfield was tense, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. Lucas's eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, his body taut with readiness. Amelia clutched her seatbelt, her mind racing with possibilities of what could go wrong. But when they arrived at the airfield, the sight of the small private plane waiting for them brought a wave of relief. Lucas's contact, a middle-aged man with a grizzled beard, greeted them quickly and ushered them toward the plane. "We need to move fast," the man said. "You've got maybe 10 minutes before someone catches on." Lucas nodded and helped Amelia into the plane. As she climbed aboard, her stomach churned with a mix of hope and dread. Was this really the end of the nightmare? Could they finally escape? But just as Lucas was about to climb in after her, the sound of tires screeching on gravel filled the air. Amelia turned to see 3 black SUVs skidding to a stop at the edge of the airfield. Men in suits poured out, guns drawn. "Go!" Lucas shouted to the pilot. "Get her out of here!" "No!" Amelia screamed, grabbing his arm. "I'm not leaving without you." Lucas pulled her close, his green eyes blazing. "You have to. It's the only way to keep you safe." Tears streamed down her face as she clung to him. "Lucas, please, don't do this." He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice breaking. "Amelia, you've given me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago. Hope. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect that. To protect you." Before she could protest further, he gently pushed her into the plane and shut the door. The pilot started the engines, and the plane began to taxi down the runway. Amelia pounded on the window, screaming for Lucas as the distance between them grew. Through the glass, she saw him turn to face the men, his posture strong and unyielding. The last thing she saw before the plane lifted off was Lucas raising his gun, ready to fight. The weeks that followed were a blur. Amelia stayed in a safe house arranged by Lucas's contact, her heart heavy with worry. Every day, she waited for news, dreading what she might hear. Then, one evening, the door to the safe house opened, and there he was, Lucas, alive but battered, his green eyes tired yet filled with relief. "Lucas!" she cried, rushing to him. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. "I told you I'd do whatever it takes to keep you safe," he murmured. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to him. "I thought I'd lost you." "Never," he said, his voice firm. "I promised you, Amelia, and I keep my promises." As they held each other, the world outside faded away. They had survived the chaos, the danger, and the impossible odds. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that no matter what, they had each other. For Lucas and Amelia, love had become their greatest strength, a force that refused to be broken, even by the darkest of nights. The first notes of the piano surged through the grand hall like an uninvited memory breaking free. Lila's hands hovered over the keys, each stroke hesitant yet purposeful, as though she could coax the life back into the house with music alone. She wasn't hired to play, she knew that, but something about the forlorn instrument called to her, its silence begging to be broken. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Startled, Lila turned to see Elijah Rhodes standing at the base of the sweeping staircase, his piercing eyes fixed on her. The chill in his gaze could have silenced her more effectively than words. "I don't recall giving you permission to touch that," Elijah said, his voice as sharp as the cold draft sneaking in through the heavy curtains. His presence was commanding, like the house itself had materialized into a man. I'm sorry, Mr. Rhodes." Lila stood abruptly, her heart racing. "I was just cleaning and thought." "Don't think." His tone cut through the air like a blade. "You're here to work, not to meddle." Elijah turned, his footsteps echoing in the vast space as he strode away, leaving Lila rooted in place. Her fingers still tingled from the brief moment they'd brought music back to the house, and though her pulse raced with embarrassment, her curiosity burned brighter. Who was Elijah Rhodes, and why did the piano's silence seem to weigh on him so heavily? The following day, the allure of the piano proved irresistible. Lila's hands grazed the keys once more, the soft notes weaving through the lifeless mansion. This time, she didn't even need to look up to know Elijah was there. His presence pressed against her like a storm cloud ready to burst. "If you're going to play," he said from the doorway, his voice quieter but no less commanding, "play something worth listening to." His words lingered even after he disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Lila to wonder. Was it the house she was trying to heal, or the man who seemed so tethered to its ghosts? From that moment, Lila knew she was walking a razor-thin line. Elijah Rhodes wasn't a man you crossed. His demeanor was as cold as the sea cliffs the mansion overlooked, and yet, the fleeting vulnerability in his eyes haunted her. There was something buried deep within him, something the piano, of all things, seemed to stir. The mansion itself reflected his solitude. Its vast halls were filled with faded grandeur, yet every corner was draped in neglect. Heavy curtains blocked the sunlight, casting shadows that seemed alive. Lila thought of the stories whispered in the nearby village, of the recluse who once had everything and now had nothing but silence. But the silence wouldn't stop her. The next time Lila sat at the piano, her fingers moved with more confidence, the melody flowing like water over stone. She played not for Elijah or the house but for herself. Music had always been her anchor, even when life felt like it was unraveling. She was so immersed that she didn't hear Elijah's approach. "You've been holding back." His voice startled her, breaking the spell. Lila turned sharply, finding him seated in one of the high-backed chairs by the fire. His posture was casual, but his gaze was anything but. It was like he was dissecting her, trying to understand what had brought her into his world. "I didn't think you liked the piano," she ventured cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. Elijah leaned back, the flickering firelight casting sharp angles across his face. "I don't. But I'd rather hear it played properly than butchered." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't a scolding either. Something about his guarded tone intrigued her. The man who barely spoke, who avoided the world, was staying in the room instead of walking away. Encouraged, Lila let her fingers find their place on the keys again. She began to play something softer, more melancholic. As the notes filled the space, she dared a glance at him. His eyes were closed, his expression uncharacteristically peaceful, as though the music had momentarily freed him from whatever shadows clung to his soul. When she finished, he opened his eyes but said nothing. The silence was heavier than before, but it felt different now, charged with something unspoken. "Why do you hate it?" Lila asked quietly, her fingers brushing the keys as if they might shield her from his wrath. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought she had overstepped. But then he exhaled, the sound laced with a weariness she hadn't heard before. "It's not the music I hate," he said finally. "It's what it reminds me of." Lila didn't push further. She simply nodded, as if to say she understood. But the truth was she didn't, not yet. All she knew was that this man, so hardened and unreachable, carried a pain so deep it seeped into every corner of the house. The next few weeks blurred into a strange rhythm. Lila worked diligently, cleaning and organizing the neglected mansion, but her evenings always ended at the piano. The melodies she played filled the air with something the house had been missing for years: life. And Elijah, despite his gruff demeanor, began to linger. Sometimes he sat silently by the fire, his eyes distant. Other times he would offer clipped comments about her playing, never kind but never cruel either. It was as if the music was drawing him out of whatever abyss he had retreated into. One rainy evening, the storm outside raged with a fury that made the windows rattle. Lila, undeterred, played a hauntingly beautiful piece that matched the tempest's mood. She didn't notice Elijah standing at the doorway until she finished. That was her favorite, he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. Lila turned to face him, her breath catching at the raw emotion in his eyes. This wasn't the cold, distant man she had come to expect. This was someone grieving, someone haunted. Her? Lila asked softly, not daring to push too hard. Elena, he said after a long pause. My wife. The words hung in the air like a confession, heavy with years of silence. Elijah crossed the room, his steps slow and deliberate, until he stood by the piano. His hand brushed against the keys, and for a moment, Lila thought he might play. But instead, he withdrew, his fingers curling into a fist. She used to play every morning, he continued, his voice cracking. This house felt alive then. Now it was a mausoleum. He didn't need to say it. Lila could feel the weight of his loss, the way it had consumed him and left him a hollow shell. You don't have to live like this, she said gently, standing to face him. Elena wouldn't want you to. His eyes snapped to hers, a flicker of anger flashing across them. Don't pretend to know what she'd want. I don't, Lila admitted, her voice steady. But I know what it's like to lose someone. And I know that shutting the world out doesn't make it hurt any less. For a moment, she thought he might lash out, but then something in him softened. He turned away, his shoulders slumping as though the weight he carried was finally too much. Why do you care? He asked quietly. Lila hesitated before answering. Because no one deserves to live in silence. Her words lingered long after she left the room, the sound of the storm outside the only thing filling the void. Over the following days, something shifted in the mansion. It was subtle at first, a curtain pulled back to let in the light, a chair by the fire no longer abandoned. Lila noticed the changes but said nothing. She simply played, her music threading through the house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Elijah's presence grew less elusive. He began joining her in the evenings, sometimes sitting by the fire, other times standing near the piano as though debating whether to engage. The conversations between them, though sparse, became more open. Each exchange was like a cautious step across a crumbling bridge. One evening, Lila found herself lingering by the library after finishing her chores. The room, like much of the house, bore the weight of years of neglect. Dust coated the shelves, and the air smelled faintly of old paper. As she tidied the desk, her hand brushed against a small wooden box. Its lid was slightly ajar, revealing a stack of papers within. Curiosity tugged at her. Carefully, she opened the box and found sheet music, handwritten and unfinished. Beneath it were letters, their edges frayed from age. She hesitated, but a name on one envelope caught her eye, Elena Rhodes. Before she could read further, the door creaked open. Elijah stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. What are you doing? He asked, his tone low and controlled, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. I was just organizing, Lila stammered, stepping back from the desk. I didn't mean to pry. Elijah crossed the room and picked up the box, his movements slow, almost reverent. He held it for a moment, his fingers tracing its edges. She used to write music, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the contents. Every note, every word. It was her way of making sense of the world. Lila watched him carefully. And you kept it all this time? I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, he admitted. But I couldn't look at it either. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words could have. Finally, Elijah set the box back down, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. You shouldn't have to keep running from it, Lila said softly. Her music could still bring something beautiful into this house. Elijah's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand, he said, his voice tight. Every note reminds me of what I've lost. And every silence does too, Lila countered, her tone gentle but firm. Maybe it's time to let the music heal you instead. For the first time, Elijah didn't argue. He simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and left the room. That night, Lila couldn't shake the image of Elijah holding the box, his pain so raw it was palpable. She sat at the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she began to play. The piece she chose was one of the unfinished compositions she had glimpsed in the box, pieced together by instinct and memory. The melody was haunting, filled with longing and love. It felt as though Elena herself were speaking through the keys. Her voice carried on the music. Lila played with her eyes closed, pouring every ounce of emotion into the piece. When she finished, the silence that followed was almost deafening. She opened her eyes to find Elijah standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "That was hers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila nodded. "I wanted to bring it back to life." Elijah stepped closer, his eyes locked on the piano. For a moment, it looked as though he might say something, but instead he sat down beside her. His hand hovered over the keys before finally pressing one. The sound was hesitant, but it resonated through the room. "She used to play this for me," he said, his voice trembling. "It was her way of telling me everything she couldn't say with words." Lila didn't respond. She simply began to play again, guiding the melody until Elijah joined in, his notes clumsy but heartfelt. Together, they filled the mansion with music, the walls reverberating with life for the first time in years. From that night on, the house began to transform. Elijah opened the curtains, letting sunlight spill into the once dark rooms. Lila tended to the overgrown garden, reviving the roses that had withered under neglect. And each evening, they played together at the piano, the melodies weaving a bond neither of them could have anticipated. But healing wasn't linear. Elijah had his moments of withdrawal, days when the weight of his grief pulled him back into the shadows. Lila stayed patient, her presence steady and unwavering. She understood that some wounds took time to mend. One afternoon, as they walked through the now-blooming garden, Elijah spoke. "You've changed this place," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "And me," Lila smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're the one who chose to let it change." They stopped by the edge of the garden, where the sea stretched endlessly before them. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and roses, a bittersweet reminder of the past and a promise of what lay ahead. "Elena once told me that music could heal anything," Elijah said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I didn't believe her. Not until now." Lila placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "It's never too late to start healing." Elijah turned to her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. For the first time, she saw not just a man burdened by loss, but someone ready to embrace life again. The days at the mansion grew brighter, not just from the sunlight now pouring in, but from the shared moments between Lila and Elijah. Their evenings at the piano became a ritual, each melody a step further away from the silence that had once suffocated the house. But as the mansion began to find its life again, so too did the tension between them grow. It was subtle, woven into the air like an unspoken melody. The way Elijah's gaze lingered a moment too long when Lila played. The way her heart quickened when their fingers accidentally brushed over the piano keys. Neither spoke of it, but it was there, undeniable. One evening, as Lila sat by the piano after finishing a lively piece, Elijah leaned against the doorway, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It was a rare sight, one she had come to cherish. "You're better than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice carrying a warmth she wasn't used to hearing. Lila grinned, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys. "High praise coming from you." Elijah chuckled, a sound so unfamiliar it startled them both. He walked over and sat beside her, his movements less guarded than they used to be. For a moment, they sat in silence, the space between them charged. "There's something I want to show you," Elijah said suddenly, standing and extending a hand. Lila blinked, her heart skipping at the unexpected gesture. "Where?" "You'll see," he said, a flicker of mystery in his eyes. He led her through the winding hallways of the mansion until they reached a door she had never noticed before. It was smaller than the others, unassuming, and when Elijah pushed it open, the scent of wood and varnish greeted her. Inside was a small room, its walls lined with instruments. Violins, cellos, flutes, and more, each one polished and placed with care. In the center of the room stood a single music stand, an empty chair beside it. "This was hers," Elijah said quietly, his voice tinged with reverence. "Elena's studio." Lila stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the space. The air felt different here, almost sacred. "It's beautiful. She used to spend hours here," he continued, "composing, practicing, dreaming. After she died, I couldn't bear to come in. But I think it's time." Lila turned to him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his expression. "You've kept it just as she left it." He nodded. It felt wrong to change anything. But now, maybe it's time to bring it back to life, too. She walked to the music stand and found a sheet of unfinished notes resting on it. Gently, she picked it up. "This is hers." Elijah nodded. "She was working on it before." His voice faltered, but he quickly steadied himself. "Before everything changed." Lila studied the notes, her mind already piecing together the melody. "I could finish it," she said softly, "if you'd let me." Elijah hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he gave a small nod. "I think she'd like that." For the next few weeks, Lila dedicated herself to the piece. She spent hours in Elena's studio, letting the music guide her. Elijah often joined her, sometimes offering suggestions, other times simply listening. The process was slow, but it was healing for both of them. The day she played the completed piece for the first time, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. Elijah stood by the doorway, his hand resting on the frame as Lila's fingers brought Elena's final composition to life. The melody was haunting yet hopeful, a bridge between grief and renewal. When the last note faded, Elijah stepped forward, his eyes shining. "She would have loved it." Lila smiled, her chest tight with emotion. "It's not just hers anymore. It's ours." Elijah reached out, his hand brushing hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a spark through her, leaving her breathless. As the mansion continued its transformation, so too did their bond. The garden bloomed with roses once more, and the piano became a centerpiece of their shared evenings. But the closer they grew, the more Lila felt the weight of the unspoken words between them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the waves crash against the cliffs, Elijah broke the silence. "I never thought I'd find peace again," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the sea. "And then you came." Lila turned to him, her heart pounding. "I didn't do anything special." "You did more than you realize," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "You reminded me what it's like to feel alive." The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming, and for a moment, Lila thought he might kiss her. But instead, he looked away, the vulnerability slipping back behind his usual guarded expression. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted, "but I don't want this, whatever it is, to end." Lila reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "Then don't let it." The words were simple, but they carried a promise. One that neither of them was ready to break. Over the next few weeks, the mansion underwent a transformation that mirrored the changes between Elijah and Lila. The dark, suffocating silence that had once defined the house was replaced by music, laughter, and the gentle hum of life. Rooms that had been shut for years were opened, their windows letting in sunlight and sea breezes. The garden, now in full bloom, became a sanctuary where Lila and Elijah often spent their afternoons. Their bond deepened in ways neither could have anticipated. Lila no longer saw Elijah as the distant, grief-stricken man she had first met. He had begun to let go of the ghosts that had haunted him for so long, and in doing so, revealed a warmth she hadn't expected. Elijah, in turn, found himself drawn to Lila's resilience and kindness, her unwavering belief that even the most broken things could heal. But as much as they tried to live in the present, the shadow of the past lingered. One evening, as they sat by the piano after playing a duet, Elijah spoke, his voice hesitant. "Lila," he began, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of the piano keys, "there's something I've been meaning to ask." She looked at him, her heart quickening at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, as though steadying himself. "You've given so much to this house, to me. But I need to know, what is it that you want?" What dream did you leave behind to come here? The question caught her off guard. She had spent so much time helping Elijah rebuild his world that she hadn't stopped to think about her own. I used to dream of becoming a pianist, she admitted, her voice soft. But life had other plans. Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. And if you had the chance to pursue it again? Lila hesitated. I don't know. It feels so far away now. It doesn't have to be, he said firmly. You've already brought music back to this house. I think it's time you let it back into your life. The next morning, Lila woke to find a small envelope on the piano. Inside was a letter from Elijah, along with a pamphlet for a music academy in the city. Lila, you've spent so much of yourself helping me find my way back to life. Now it's your turn. The academy is ready to take you as a student, and I'll support you every step of the way. You've given me more than I could ever repay, but this is my way of trying. Elijah. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the letter. She hadn't allowed herself to hope for this, to dream again. When she found Elijah in the garden later that morning, she didn't know what to say. I can't accept this, she began, holding the letter tightly in her hand. Yes, you can, he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. You deserve this, Lila. More than anyone I know. But what about you? The house, she asked, her voice breaking. I can't just leave everything behind. Elijah stepped closer, his gaze steady. This house is alive again because of you, and so am I. But you don't belong here, not forever. You belong out there, chasing the life you've always wanted. Lila searched his eyes, finding nothing but sincerity. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving him, of leaving the life they had built together, was almost unbearable. I don't want to lose this, she whispered. You won't, he said, taking her hands in his. This isn't an ending, Lila. It's a beginning for both of us. The day Lila left for the city was bittersweet. The entire village gathered to see her off, their well wishes and hugs a testament to the impact she had made. Elijah stood apart from the crowd, his usual stoic demeanor hiding the emotions swirling beneath the surface. As the car pulled up, Lila turned to him, her heart heavy. Thank you, Elijah, for everything. He smiled faintly, his eyes soft. You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. What? Don't forget what you've taught me. That even the darkest places can find light again. Tears threatened to spill as she nodded. I won't. He stepped closer, hesitating for only a moment before pulling her into a tight embrace. You'll always have a place here, Lila, no matter what. As she drove away, Lila looked back at the mansion one last time. It stood tall against the horizon, no longer the dark, desolate place it had once been. And though her heart ached, she knew this wasn't truly goodbye. Months passed, and Lila thrived at the academy. Her talent blossomed under the guidance of skilled instructors, and she found herself performing on stages she had only dreamed of before. Each time she played, she thought of Elijah, of the house, and of the journey that had brought her here. Elijah, meanwhile, continued to rebuild his life. He opened the mansion to the community, hosting music nights and charity events in honor of Elena's memory. The house, once steeped in sorrow, became a place of joy and connection. One evening, as Lila prepared for her first major concert, a familiar face appeared in the audience. Elijah sat in the front row, his eyes filled with pride as he watched her take the stage. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt a surge of emotion, knowing he had come all this way to support her. As she played, the music soared through the hall, weaving together the story of their journey, of loss, healing, and the bonds that refused to break. And in that moment, Lila knew that no matter where life took her, she and Elijah would always be connected.